What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football and sports betting home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me once again, it's Brian Twining. What's up, Brian?
What's up, Kyle? I'm excited to dive into this best ball draft we just recently completed, and as it was my first one I've ever done, so can't wait to see how well I did or how crappy I'm going to be.
I think it's a great tool to get ready for the season. And if you've never done a best ball draft, go check out our latest pod with John Daigle from Roto World. We talk some tips, some tricks, some players to target, some players to avoid, and just different ways to play. So go check that out. It's on iTunes, it's on Stitcher, it's on our YouTube feed. But we wanted to review Brian's first draft. We wanted to review some of our takeaways from the draft, some of our thoughts. But Brian, I guess, what was your initial reaction to best ball, and how is it different from other drafts you've done?
I mean, I think the major difference has to do with the bye weeks, and in redraft, it's probably the least important thing that I'm looking at is when guys are on buys, because there is so much roster turnover. There's a lot of injuries. Most of the time, half of your team is not the same by the end of the year as you making tons of transactions, trying to find the next big thing. Whereas in best ball, like the guys you draft is your team for the entirety of the season. So, you find you need to make sure you have coverage for every week of the year.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point. Like, and it's funny to me because some people will go into redraft with that mindset of I need to get all my bye weeks figured out and I need to have it all set up. And then you look at your roster by week 5, week 6, week 7, and like 80% or 60% or 40% of those guys are away, and whether it's a trade or roster or waiver wire or whatever, it's funny how that happens. But yeah, in best ball, you have to definitely, you don't want to go out of your way, but if you're like between two players and you're like, oh, I need to make sure I cover my bye week, and if I go here, then I have a better chance. Or with your quarterbacks, especially, you want to be specific about, okay, well, I drafted Russell Wilson, his bye week 6. I don't want to draft any other quarterbacks that are going to have a week 6 bye week, and kind of figure that out. My other question for you is, we typically wait on quarterback, typically wait on tight end. But in this league, you not only are you're drafting at least 2 of those because you have to be able to cover said bye weeks. You have to be able to maintain injuries. So that means that those positions are getting pushed up a little bit. Was it hard for you to pull the trigger? I mean, obviously you took Dak Prescott in round 7. Was it just a kind of feeling out the draft and like, oh, the quarterbacks are starting to move? Let me jump on it, or what? How because we want to wait, we want to get that best value. So how did it impact the way you drafted for this league?
Yeah, I gotta say, it definitely gave me a lot of anxiety drafting Dak in the 7th round as the 5th quarterback off the board, because that isn't something that I normally do in redraft leagues. But after the top 4 guys were taken with Kyler, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson, the next guy for me is Dak Prescott. Like him and Kyler are kind of at the 3-4 range for me. So I wanted to be able to get an elite guy that, as long as he stays healthy, I know I'm getting top 10 production the entire year in best ball, and I know he's going to have a lot of spike weeks with the kind of offense they run. Yeah. So I feel I reached a little bit for my liking, but I'm happy with taking Prescott rather than waiting a little bit longer and going with the likes of like a Josh Allen, a Baker Mayfield, or something, guys like that.
Yeah, and like, to be fair, between round 7 and 10, so that 3-round span, 12 quarterbacks went off the board. Another 8 or so went after, between 12 and 14. So quarterbacks generally go in that range. So you got in at the right time. And had you not taken Dak there, you would have been looking. I mean, you could have waited another round and taken Deshaun Watson instead. But I mean, I think I'd rather have your combination of Dak Prescott and Mike Williams than, say, Marquise Brown and Deshaun Watson, or Jamison Crowder and Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, I mean, and then something else that came into that decision was the fact that on my previous pick, I had taken Michael Gallup, and luckily for me, as John had said, like, it's good to kind of stack players. And as as me, I talked about it on the pod. Like I still am really high on Gallup's potential for this year. So if I think he's going to do really well, and we've been harping on this for however long we've been doing these podcasts, like if we think the skill position players are going to be good, that means the quarterback's going to be good and vice versa. So I figured I would kind of combo those two together.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. Like, when you think about this, you're not trying to you're trying to win the league. And when you're shooting for upside, you're shooting for potential. You want to target those offenses that you think are going to be dynamic, that you think are going to have a big impact this season in fantasy, and grabbing a few pieces, even if it's not necessarily like you didn't grab Zeke and Amari Cooper, but you grabbed chunks of that Dallas offense, valuable chunks of the Dallas, because obviously not only going to get the Amari Cooper, the Zeke stuff with Dak, but you're also going to get some of that passing game with Michael Gallup, which I actually think is going to have a nice value, as we talked about with the quarantine situation kind of throwing a wrench into the offseason. I think it might take CeeDee Lamb a little bit longer to get to where he needs to be a thing that takes Michael Gallup out of the offense. And, there's a good chance that, we're talking about this Cowboys offense in 2 years as CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup, not CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. So I like where your head's at. So for you, I guess at the top of the board, and we'll just kind of run through this. You went 3 running backs in your first 4 picks: Dalvin Cook, Jonathan Taylor, David Montgomery.
Poor Monty.
I kind of like him this year. I've been seeing some positive stuff trickle out about him, and he's becoming a guy that I think has that top 12 type upside, but you can get in round 4. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I will say I do like that strategy. I myself went Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders. I'd pick 11. So I went Jacobs at 11, and then Sanders at 13. Or 14.
I like that combo, by the way. I think that's 2 really dynamic players.
Yeah, guys that I think we could talk about Carlos Hyde going to Seattle, but Carlos Hyde going to Seattle means Carlos Hyde's not going to Philly. I still think they'll get somebody, but if Miles Sanders is getting 65% of the work instead of 55% of the work, I'm a lot happier. But I've done 3 drafts so far, and I've tried, I've been talking with Jared Small on Twitter and different things. And, a lot of people have start with your running back core early, get your receivers, and then kind of figure everything else out. And that's typically how I draft my best ball teams. I've tried to do it the other way. Like I love getting Michael Thomas or Devontae Adams early, but I'm just never quite as happy with my team, especially because I'm happy going 0 RB and working the waiver wire and finding those studs. But in best ball, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's something else I wasn't even really thinking about. In best ball, with the inability to make roster moves,
yeah,
you kind of need to get that solid base of running backs who are going to be getting the majority of the work, or at least they're in a good timeshare where it's 50-50, because you can't hope players are going to be taking over roles. So, like, for instance, I took Zach Moss, in round 10, where in a redraft league, like that's fantastic. But if he was my second running back taken in this best ball, I'd be in pretty bad shape, hoping that he was going to be getting any sort of, decent amount of touches. So yeah, I could say that I would probably lean towards stacking running backs in future drafts.
Yeah, and Moss is a great target to if you think that he is going to become the guy in Buffalo. Obviously, you don't want to take Singletary and Moss. Like, you're not trying to do any sort of handcuff situation. You're trying to get the most points possible. You're shooting for the moon. And the one nice thing about best ball is it really takes a lot of the guesswork out of it when you're starting your teams every single week. So grabbing value, especially at a position like running back. Like, I did the same thing with, fingers crossed, Justin Jackson, who I took in round 19 just because he kept falling to me and I didn't know what to do with him. But if he becomes a touchdown guy in that offense and kind of is the the Thunder to Austin Eckler's Lightning, even if it's 40% of the work, but 70% of the goal line touches. I'm gonna be loving life.
Yeah, that could be one of those picks that helps propel you to the top of the league if he is to be kind of like you said, the Thunder, and we don't really see Kelly in there as much with this whole situation of the coronavirus going on and him not being able to be working to the offense. So that could be one of the steals of this draft.
Was there any picks in this draft that you thought, wow, that's great value, or wow, that that really worked out for that person?
I mean, I'm gonna stick with my team, but I love getting Russell Gage in round 19.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy he showed that he could be an integral part of that offense down the stretch last year as he was playing with Calvin Ridley hurt, Julio Jones being kind of hampered. Seemed to develop a pretty good rapport with Matt Ryan, and in an offense that's going to be throwing a lot. We saw it last year again. Dirk Cutter hates running the ball. They're going to be losing, as we alluded to on our last podcast. That the defense is still garbage. So in a pass-heavy offense in round 19 as my sixth wide receiver, I think that's great. He could be one of those guys with the injury history of Julio and Ridley to a certain extent. He takes over. He's the number 2 guy there. I'm looking at a good wide receiver on a weekly basis.
Well, and as we talked about with John, this is a team that lost a lot of production from their passing game a year ago. Almost 40% of their targets are out the window. Austin Hooper's gone. Obviously Gurley's going to come in and get some of that work. We talked about our love for Hayden Hurst. We think he's going to be involved, but Russell Gage could absolutely see a nice little uptick and be a lot more involved in that offense, and getting him late is great. And even if it's 3 games or 4 games where he goes for 89 yards, a touchdown, maybe 6 catches, 4 catches, whatever it is, like, you're loving life for those games where you get to use him. The pick that I really liked, and I'm gonna kind of throw you under the bus with this one, but Carrion Johnson went after Jordan Howard, Latavius Murray, and your Sony Michel. If Brady was still there, I'd love the Sony pick, but I have so many questions about that offense. Like, Latavius is interesting if we think he's going to be heavily involved in. Like, I want to be excited about Jordan Howard, but this was basically, I think that pick was made before the whole Matt Breida stuff. Or was it? No, Matt Breida was probably there, huh?
No, I think Matt Breida was there.
Yeah, so I don't get that at all. So unless they think Jordan Howard's going to be the guy, but yeah, I know there's a lot of debate about what Carrion Johnson may or may not be and how much he may be involved and if he can even finish the season. So I get him, but I really like that pick.
I have to admit that one was really hard for me to do, and I went back and forth because I did kind of seesaw on whether I was going to take Carrion or Sony, and my thought process for taking Mr. PlayStation is, I just think with Stidham taking over, I think we are going to see a more run heavy approach, less James White, more ground and pound, and I mean, even if the offense takes a step back, I mean, we're talking about an NFL offense that still operates pretty efficiently. And if they're down by the goal line, they do rely heavily on the running game. And Michel is most likely to get those carries over anybody else. So that was kind of the direction that I went.
Was there anything you wish you had done differently, or you wish you had gone in on a position earlier, or anything like that? That now looking back at it, you're just like, not really sure why I went that way.
I like my team, but I am kicking myself over the fact that I didn't take Larry Fitzgerald you took him in round 16 when I took Irv Smith as my second tight end. And, we've talked about this multiple times. We both think that Cardinals offense is going to be, we're looking at a run and shoot style where they're going to be throwing 40 to 50 passes a game. And even though Fitz has lost a step, he's still going to be garnering, upwards of 120, 130 targets on the season. So that's, again, another really good value pick that I'm kicking myself over not taking and then going somewhere else as a backup tight end.
Yeah, I mean, and I obviously Fitzgerald's not going to be a sexy pick. He's not going to be a wide receiver, the wide receiver one, but I think he'll be a guy that finds himself in my lineups a lot of weeks, and just brings safety and reliability. And if another year of Kyler, that offense takes another step forward. I think it makes a lot of sense. Um, I'm starting to question taking Odell Beckham over Allen Robinson, Amari Cooper, and Juju Smith-Schuster.
I was going to ask you about that one.
I really
This
like.
this is your love for the Browns coming out.
I do love the Browns. I still think there's a lot of room, and I still think the optimism we had a season ago is still there. I still think we can be excited about this offense. I think Stefanski can do a lot. Um, but it might take a few weeks to get there. I don't know, but uh, Allen Robinson is so sexy and so like rock solid and gonna be so heavily involved. Where this Browns offense has so many different pieces and parts, and it could be a Jarvis Landry game. It could be we go to the tight ends with Austin Hooper and David Njoku. It could be all Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. And there could be certain games where Odell's just not quite as involved. So um, but he also has the wide receiver one upside where he goes for 1,500 yards and 12 to 15 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at them, comparably, I would take Odell over Robinson in a 1-to-1 comparison. But for me, I'm just so concerned with Baker Mayfield and his ability to be able to get the ball to his guys
It's all
that
right. Case Keenum will start if he's that terrible.
to be honest with you, I almost feel like Case Keenum would be better for Beckham because he plays on schedule. And you just get the ball to a guy like Beckham, and he makes things happen.
Yeah.
It's like we saw that with Stephon Diggs. He had games where he had 2 catches with Kirk Cousins, and Stephon Diggs is an elite talent.
Yeah.
It's a similar situation with Beckham. Like, he's one of the elite wide receivers. It's just, can the quarterback get him the ball?
Yeah. My running back core I'm pretty happy with. Obviously Jacobs and Miles Sanders. Then I've got J.K. Dobbins, which I really think he can take over from Mark Ingram. I think he can at least be involved and then take over as the season goes along. And then obviously Ronald Jones. This is the Ronald Jones hive, so I had to get involved there. And Tevin Coleman. I love the Niners offense. I think it's going to still be incredibly run heavy, and I feel like last year everyone assumed they knew exactly what would happen, and Matt Breida ends up being the guy to own early, and then late, obviously Raheem Mostert takes over, but Tevin Coleman's still there. Tevin Coleman's still involved, and I still think he can be the guy. And I'm gonna be targeting this offense. I think come redraft time, but I think once again I'm gonna be waiting for whoever's the last guy. I'm not gonna pay the price for Raheem Mostert when I can get
No.
another guy that I think has just as much potential several rounds later.
Well, we actually did a podcast last year where we talked about who would you rather have, and we chose I think it was either Mostert or Jeff Wilson as a guy to keep at the end of your bench, just because of the style of offense that they run. And then a couple of weeks later, after that, we saw that guy go off for multiple
Yeah.
touchdowns in a game, and it's you're picking based on the offense, not just the player, specifically for like how they're going to be utilized if there is an injury to occur or if they are the one getting the majority of the touches.
Yeah, and it's like we can use, obviously we're using information and stuff we're getting, and the skill set and kind of trying to project the player, but you also don't want to assume like everything. Like, you have to give yourself some wiggle room. So if you have two players that are pretty similar, like you think, okay, well, obviously I like this guy better, but if I can get a 10-round difference and I can grab, and instead of taking Tevin Coleman around 3, I'm taking Matt Breida in around 12, around 13. Like, I did that and I was very happy. And then obviously, we were told people to pick up Jeff Wilson because injuries can occur, and then he becomes the touchdown guy, and and this, that, and the third. But yeah, that's the fun about best balls too, is because you can take some shots on guys like that. This goes 20 rounds. Obviously, you're drafting two defenses, two kickers, or no, two defenses, two quarterbacks, two tight ends at least. A couple things on your team. I probably would have taken another tight end. I love Hayden Hurst. I think he can be a tight end one, but when Irv Smith's the only other tight end you have, like
I
I think there's a chance that he takes over and he's a lot more, especially with Stephon Diggs out of the picture. Like I like that player a lot, um, but I would have probably added like one of the
even Greg Olsen.
right, yeah, Greg Olsen went in round 20, and I think like had you taken him instead of Russell Gage and then Gage on the way back,
or just stuck with Brent Edwards.
yeah, or Chris Herndon or Gerald Everett could have made sense too. I think if you had three of those guys, I think you'd feel a little bit better. But
Full disclosure, though, my next pick with Mohamed Sanu, that was actually a mistake, fat finger press, because I
yeah.
was looking at the player and I went to X out and I accidentally hit the draft button. So I just went, oh well, what are you
This is
gonna
where we're
do?
at.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, and that stuff does happen. Like, I did have to, turning on notifications, taking some time. That is the one nice thing about when you do these best ball drafts with a slower clock. It's just so much easier to like, okay, look at my roster. Where am I at? You have some time to kind of figure things out before you dive in. Okay, what has the last group of teams done? Is if I take a quarterback here, am I going to start a run, or do I can I feel comfortable waiting until I come back around? So little things like that, it definitely helps doing it on a slow clock.
Yeah, and I think it's also like part of the game, and it makes it more fun too to have to analyze the group of guys that are coming up and who you're going to be skipping on if you were to take somebody at this level. And you have to do a little more research in a slow draft, looking ahead to that. Like, okay, am I going to start loading up on this position and then kind of punt on these next group of guys, this next 18 guys, because I have, if you're on a turn pick, you have, a full 22 picks or 23 picks before your next one.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I do like what you did with your running backs though, because obviously Dalvin Cook's a stud. But I think Jonathan Taylor and David Montgomery, if you're talking about ceiling, like I think they could both be really, really impactful top 5, 6, 7 type guys. Obviously we love that offense for Taylor, and if the keys are handed to him on day one, I mean that's like a 1,200 yard, 10 to 15 touchdown type season in the making. And if the Bears get something out of Nick Foles, and instead of the train wreck that is Mitchell Trubisky, I think David Montgomery is going to be a lot better. So I like to get 4 or 5 running backs that I love, that I think have stud potential, and then just and then kind of fill in the gaps elsewhere. And I think obviously you went a little with that fourth guy. You went with a combination of Sony Michel, Zach Moss, and Darrington Evans, which I like. I like Evans a lot. I think he could be really interesting. There's definitely a path to Zach Moss being the guy. And if the Patriots offense isn't as bad as we all expect, which we've been proven that that's not always the case. Maybe Sony Michel is a guy that's interesting, and even if it's just a volume play, like we saw how obviously he's not as good as Joe Mixon, but Joe Mixon was really fantasy viable last year, even though the Bengals offense was an absolute train wreck. So weirder stuff has happened. So if he's getting that, where volume is key, if he's getting the majority of the work, you're going to be loving life.
Yeah, that was something else that I found interesting, was the fact that both Jonathan Taylor and J.K. Dobbins went before their predecessors on their current teams. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you got a lot of people, we're looking towards the future already, and the guys that are the home run hitters, as opposed to kind of the steady eddies on the rosters.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I want to kind of keep an eye on ADP as we approach redraft season, as other people start getting involved and seeing, Damian Williams and Marlon Mack. How much are they rising? How much is Clyde Edwards-Helaire and J.K. Dobbins and Jonathan Taylor falling? Like, Is it we're excited, or are we going to be, as we get closer to the season, getting more and more information that actually that's the way to go, and these guys are going to get, we're going to be looking at Jonathan Taylor as a second round pick instead of a third round pick, where and then maybe J.K. Dobbins is a third instead of a fourth, that kind of thing. So, that those are the things that are really fun to kind of track, because then when you're heading into redraft season, when you're heading into, your home leagues, whatever, you have a better base on where these players should be going and when you have to reach, when you have to grab, and all that stuff.
Who's the player that you are most disappointed that you missed out on? Like somebody sniped you, or
that's a great call. Do you have one off the top of your head?
I mean, obviously, I'm disappointed I didn't get Fitz because I try to get him on every fantasy team. But for me, it's got to be David Johnson with Houston. I took Metcalf there as my second wide receiver, but I was really hoping that Johnson had fallen to me, and I would have taken a fourth running back right there, because I really feel that if Carlos Hyde was able to put up 1,000 yards and 6-7 touchdowns, David Johnson in a similar offense, minus DeAndre Hopkins now, I think is going to be able to put up pretty good fantasy numbers for somebody that was taken as like RB24 or something.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great call. And if you head over to fakepigskin.com, I wrote up an article about 3 guys that I'm think are fantasy values in best ball, and David Johnson was one of the names that I mentioned. So, when you're aiming for the ceiling, when you're aiming for a guy who could be the RB1, he was the RB1 2 years ago in an offense where, if he stays healthy, he runs the ball efficiently, he's going to be involved in the passing game. This could be a monster season for him. And if things don't go well, then you'll know early and he'll be out of the picture, and you'll have to turn to your other pieces. But no, I think David Johnson's absolutely a guy that I will be targeting. There really isn't like one name that I kind of wish had fallen to me, or I was about to take. I really wish I had gotten more Matthew Stafford, just because I love him as a player, and I think I waited too long. I got I took Noah Fant, and I took Golden Tate, and then ended up taking Derek Carr as my QB2. And I don't love that quite as much, but you also have to play with the bye weeks and stuff. And I had Aaron Rodgers, so Stafford would, he's a week 5. So if you have players that you're going to be targeting, or you'd really like to target, plan ahead for that too. And don't, if you have 2 quarterbacks that I loved, Carson Wentz, Aaron Rodgers, even Baker Mayfield, those guys are all kind of I would have been happy with any of those. And then, okay, well, if I want to get Stafford in 2 rounds, then let me grab a guy who doesn't have a week 5 bye, because once you pencil that in, then you can't go back to it. The one other tip I would recommend is, if you don't get a guy like an Aaron Rodgers, like a Patrick Mahomes, like a Dak Prescott, and you go the route of a Baker Mayfield and a Derek Carr, grab a third guy just to be safe. If you're using the draft capital on a guy with more upside, I'm fine rolling with 2. Same thing with tight ends. But if you're getting a little more, where it's going to be, if it's a guy that you potentially streaming during the season, I would make sure you have 3, not 2.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you mentioned that, because we had talked off the air about this, that even though I had Dak Prescott and I wound up taking Drew Lock, I'm not enamored with having Drew Lock as my only other quarterback in this league if Prescott were to go down. But
yeah.
I was seriously contemplating going with Ryan Fitzpatrick towards the end of this draft, just with some kind of blanket security for a guy who we've seen be able to put up 3-4 touchdowns, as he's this generation's Brett Favre gunslinger type guy that, even on a crappy team, he's going to put up some okay numbers. And I don't think it's quite Tua's team just yet. So, he'd be a guy I'd be targeting if you are going that 3 QB route.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because he's a great option where if you want to take a younger quarterback that might take some time to develop, Like if you're like, oh, Joe Burrow is going to break out this year. It might take him 6 weeks to finally emerge and then be really good, or even Drew Lock to a lesser extent. Like it might be a little slower to start. Like he's a great option. Okay, well this guy might have 4 or 5 a couple monster games before he starts throwing a bunch of picks and is eventually replaced. But at least you get that point. The other thing is you do take defense and you usually take two of them. It is interesting to kind of look. Obviously, people still sort of wait till the end. I was a little more aggressive. I took Baltimore in round 14, and then I took Denver in round 17. But like we were Graham Barfield was in this draft with us, and looking at his draft, he went Seattle and Miami. I'm wondering if like as good as Baltimore or San Francisco or Buffalo or even New England might be, are they really going to be that much better on a week-to-week basis where, basically I could have taken James Washington. I could have taken, Alan Lazard. Like I could have taken another potential big play receiver and waited and taken Denver and Houston or Denver and Carolina or whatever it may be.
Yeah, thinking about it now as I'm looking at my team, like I have two good defenses, like real life defenses that get you good steady points, but neither of them are real like turnover machines and that get those monster weeks of punt returns or defensive touchdowns in Minnesota and Dallas. And, being that this is best ball, you're trying to get some kind of difference on a week to week basis. And, a team like Miami who has really good corners and they're playing with a bunch of young quarterbacks in that
Yeah,
division.
when you're facing Sam Darnold and Josh Allen and Jared
And Jared
Stidham,
Stidham, they can have some weeks where they have a couple pick sixes, so I think that's great. And also thinking about the fact that you kind of want to load up on guys that could have those spike weeks, like a James Washington, for instance, rather than, defenses. What is the average difference in scoring on a week to week basis from 1 to 20 even on defense? It's probably a handful of points. So
well, and
you're not really.
There's so much turnover on a year-to-year basis where people even like, oh, the Chicago's always, oh, and now it's Baltimore, oh, and now it's this team, and it's like, people are going to draft the Niners 4 or 5 rounds too early, and the Niners I still think are going to have a good defense, but they still have questions at corner. They still have some deficiencies, and they played in a division with a really good Seattle, a really good Arizona, and a really good Rams offense. So they could have some bummer games, and you're kind of frustrated. And why did I draft them? So it's hard to. That's something I think I learned from this draft that I'm going to use going forward.
Yeah, and then also like we talked about this with John. I think this is a good kind of like beginning to your research for your redraft leagues, like looking at where ADP kind of begins and how it evolves. Looking at the draft in round 13, for instance, Preston Williams, N'Keal Harry, Hunter Renfrow, Alexander Madison. Who else on here? Deshaun Jackson, all going in round 13, which is close to the end of redraft leagues. Like if you're getting guys like that kind of value, you might be able to wait at the wide receiver position and load up on your running backs in a redraft league, knowing that these guys are going to be target monsters and be really good for PPR scoring.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a few of these, throughout the off season and see how my thoughts change, and be like, why in the world did I draft this guy in round 13? He's terrible. Or how did I get him? This guy at such a good value. His ADP shot up 6 rounds. It's just that is one of the fun things, and also just keeping track of how many times I draft a guy, how many times I draft this guy. And okay, I'm obviously going to be a big fan of, certain players. And if you're doing a few of these and you're kind of doing them throughout the off season, it's good to kind of, as we mentioned with John, to diversify a little bit. Like don't always take, Carson Wentz and Dak Prescott. Okay, if I have Wentz and Aaron Rodgers going in the same region, flip them and take him for a couple picks, or wait at quarterback and take a couple, upside shots and see if you like your team better that way. And like one thing I've learned is in best ball, I love going running backs early, and in redraft, I'm going to probably do a little more receiver early, but yeah, I did the opposite, thinking, okay, well, that's how I normally draft, and I'm not quite as happy with my team, just because there's so many receiver values in that mid range.
Well, I mean, just like the guys that I mentioned, and then you got Tyrell Williams, really late, Larry Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I went
even Cole
Tyrell Williams.
Beasley.
Yeah, Tyrell Williams, Larry Fitzgerald, Cole Beasley, and then Demarcus Robinson, my last pick. Like those
who
are
could wind up being the other outside receiver if Kansas City decides to jettison Sammy Watkins somewhere. So,
yeah, or Sammy Watkins gets hurt, or has concussions or whatever,
like every year.
Yeah, so we'll have to do this. We'll have to keep an eye on the ADP and do a couple more of these throughout the year to kind of get a sense of where the ADP is heading, where people's draft thoughts are heading, where our draft thoughts are heading. To be honest, like, we may assume that we're in on somebody, and then we get more information, get more research, and change our mindset, or say, hey, it's just too aggressive at that price tag. So, are you interested in doing some more, Brian?
Sure.
Yeah,
I love drafting. Preparing and doing a draft is probably my favorite part of fantasy.
Well, and that's the coolest thing, is with best ball, you get to have all the fun of drafting without having to do the in-season management. You don't have to go set your lineup every so if you, instead of joining another 12 dynasty leagues, or committing to all these redraft leagues, you can do a bunch of best ball and then just focus on your handful of leagues that you really want to care about, and then you're still doing as much drafting. You're still and at the end of the year, you might be winning some cash money if you take home some of these prizes. So all right, Brian, anything else before we get out of here?
No, I just want to say happy drafting, everybody. This is the best time to start getting prepared here, because this is the beginning of ADP, and you really get to kind of see where you can steal values and who to kind of let people take right now, rather than jumping the gun on certain guys. Like, I am kind of worried at Jonathan Taylor even in round 3, because we don't know what the play is going to be. But other than that, I'm just happy to get some kind of fantasy sports still going, and
absolutely,
hopefully we get a football season.
Yep. And then make sure you are joining us every Wednesday live on our YouTube. Bring your questions, bring your comments. We're always down to chat. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at FPAOP. This Wednesday we will not be recording. I have a prior commitment, but I think we'll either do Tuesday or Thursday. We'll tweet that out. Make sure you're checking in on that. And anything you want us to talk about, if you have show ideas or information you want us to dig up for you, let us know. And we'll try and crank that out, because this is the off season of content. So we're in the heart of best ball season. If you want to jump into a best ball league, Best Ball 10s is a great way to go. Low cost of admission. Super fun. There's there's ones that you can do if you want to just draft right away, where you can have a minute clock. There's ones that you can have up to 8 hours, and you get an email and you can hop in that way. So a multitude of ways to draft. But for Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.